Okay, so let's move on to the cells that make the xylem. So the xylem, the water conducting cells of the xylem, can be classified into two types, the tracheids and the vessel elements. So these are living cells while they are immature, but once they became mature, the living parts of the cell disintegrate and the mature cells become dead. So we have two types, the tracheids and the vessel elements. So the tracheids are the small kind of tube cells. So these are the tracheids, the small ones, or it is shown here. So we have many of these small channels, the tracheids, and we have the vessel elements. So these are the large pores or tubes of the xylem. So tracheids are found in the xylem of all vascular plants. So if you consider the three groups of the vascular plants, the seedless vascular plants, the gymnosperms, the angiosperms, all of them, they have the tracheids. When moving to the vessel elements are common among the angiosperms. So most angiosperms contain the vessel elements. Some of the gymnosperms have the vessel elements, but not all of them. So that means that the angiosperms usually contain both the tracheids and the vessel elements, and the vessel elements are larger, wider tubes that allow more passage of water and minerals, and they are stacked on top of each other, and they have this perforation allowing one tube to connect to the next one, and by doing that they form long micropipes called the vessels. That's why they are called the vessel elements. So it is more or less similar to the structure of the phloem, with the exception that the phloem is composed of living cells, while the vessel elements, they are composed of dead cells at maturity. So let's revise. So water and minerals, they have moved from the soil, they have crossed the epidermis, then the layers of the cortex, then the endodermis, they have crossed the Casparian strip, and they have moved into the xylem, so the tracheids or the vessel elements, and they are ready now to be transported throughout the plant. So what actually generates the force that will move the xylem sap? So as you know, the minerals dissolved in the water that will be transported through the xylem is called the xylem sap, similar to the phloem sap, which we have discussed before. So the sugars dissolved in this aqueous solution moved by the phloem is called phloem sap. Here we have a xylem sap. So what is the driving force for the movement of the xylem sap, especially thinking that they are now moving against the gravity? So they will be moving from the root till they reach the different parts of the plants, like the leaves, so against the gravity. So what is the force that can allow the transport of the xylem sap? So this force is actually the transpirational pull. So what is happening, we can summarize it in these three steps shown here in the text. So number one, water vapor in the air spaces of the leaf will diffuse out and exit the leaf via the stomata. So what are the stomata? The opening in the lower side of the leaf. So as you can see, the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis. The lower epidermis, they have the stomata, the openings that will allow the exchange of gases, and it will allow also the transpirational pull. So here we have this area, the airspace, this like cavity thing. So it is, and here we have the drops of water represented by these blue dots. So water will diffuse out of the stomata, and here we are showing stoma. Stoma is the singular of stomata, so stomata is the plural form. So water vapor in the airspace will move out of the leaf through the stomata opening. And what will happen next, then water from the mesophyll cells will come to replace the water that they have diffused out of the cells. So number one is the movement of water vapor from the airspace to outside of the leaf through the stomata. Number two is the movement of water from the mesophyll to replace the water that has been lost through the airspace. And number three, this will create like a pulling force that will pull water from the adjacent tissues. And you can see here we have the xylem is adjacent to that, so this will pull water from the xylem to replace the water that has been lost by the mesophyll cells. So what we have been showing in the previous slide is what is happening in this part of the figure. So water vapor lost through the stomata. So water will move from the airspace, this cavity that you can see here, will go out of the stomata. This will pull water from the mesophyll cells to replace it, and this will eventually create a pulling force that will pull water from the xylem. So inside the xylem we have the xylem sap that is creating water, and as you can see the driving force here is the transpiration. So what will happen next? Inside the xylem water are moving, and we have also dissolved nutrients. So water molecules are characterized by having what we call a cohesion and adhesion. So each water molecule, this is the oxygen, this is the hydrogen, and this is the hydrogen. This is another water molecule. So the hydrogen is slightly positive charged, the oxygen is slightly negative charge. So because of the attraction between negative and positive charge, there are cohesion bonds. So there are cohesion forces between the water molecules because of the hydrogen bonding. Because of that, one water molecule, once they are moving through the xylem vessels, each water molecule is actually pulling another water molecule, which is pulling another water molecule, and so on. So this creates a kind of continuous film of water molecules. So the movement is enhanced or facilitated by the cohesion forces. In addition to that, we have also adhesion forces between the water molecules and the cell wall of the xylem vessels. So the result of adhesion and the results of cohesion, both of them, they facilitate the movement of water even in the very long plants or like trees. So water is uptaken from the soil, as we have mentioned, crossing the epidermis, crossing the cortex, crossing the endodermis, crossing the Casparian strip, and then moving inside the xylem vessels. This will be pulled by the transpirational pull, and it will be moving through the xylem vessels even in the very long plants, facilitated by the cohesion and adhesion. So here is the definition of the cohesion forces, and if you think that this will work perfectly, yes, it will work perfectly in most cases. However, there are some problems that the plants may face during drought, stresses, or freezing conditions. So during drought or freezing conditions, that will create what we call a cavitation. So you can think of it as like air bubbles. So these air bubbles will create like pockets. It will create like cavities. This will break the continuity of the water film. This will break the ability of the water molecules to pull each other. So that's why plants usually face difficulties when they are faced by drought or freezing conditions, because that transpirational pull will not work in its optimum potential.